Welcome to Series 1, Episode 11 of the In Her Financial Shoes podcast. Welcome to the In Her Financial Shoes podcast with me, Catherine Morgan, founder of The Money Panel, helping you to get financially naked. Listen in each week where we talk about that taboo subject of money. Listen to brutally real-life stories, step into our guest shoes and be left feeling 100% confident and in control. Oh, and we hate financial jargon, so don't expect any here. Small steps, big wins, let's go. Hi, and welcome to the podcast. So in today's episode, we're going to be talking about something called the envelope system. Now, for those of you who follow the likes of Dave Ramsey in America, Dave Ramsey talks about this concept of drawing out cash and putting it into an envelope and using that to help you budget on a particular category where you may be overspending. Now, my guest today, Roxanne Bergman, who is owner of Rox Picks Photography, who's local in my area, actually. And she and I were having a conversation in the Facebook community just before Christmas about this concept of the envelope system. And the question I put out into my group was who'd ever heard of it and who's been using it. And she was one of the first people that commented to say how successful it had been for her in her life and enabled her to be very much intentional with money. Now, for those of you who listen to the podcast regularly will know how important it is to be intentional with money, to be proactive with money rather than reactive with money. And this kind of way or concept of managing money enabled Roxanne to really hone in on being intentional with money and also creating some organization for her finances. So Roxanne is going to give us some of her personal journey about how she implemented this particular process, if you like. And it's been one of my favourite interviews so far on the podcast. We had some times where we had to actually break off and just giggle because she was just so funny, so down to earth and really inspirational how she's built her business the way that she has. Now, in this particular episode, we do start talking about different ways to manage money. And I've actually put together an online course for those of you who want to dive more into how you can actually start having a better relationship with money and managing your finances. And you can find out some information about this online course over at their website, which is www.themoneypanel.co.uk. And if you click on the button that says online courses, you'll be able to access the From Spender to Saver course. Now, this is a mini course that I've put together off the back of a group training program that I ran last year. And the course is broken down into 7 different teachings, and they range from the actual tools, the practical tools to give you to actually start creating yourself a spending plan, not a budget plan, but a spending plan. It will enable you to create that spending plan to identify where you're spending your money, understanding where your money's going and take back some control. We also teach you in the course how you can stick to that plan, different ways to manage your money, and also ways that you can help to automate some of your habits to become a super saver. We also talk through some different concepts as to how you can organise your financial paperwork and then next steps to actually get started. So if you are interested in that course, just head over to the website, www.themoneypanel.co.uk, and click on the online courses tab. Also, we do talk about the Facebook community, and if you aren't already in my Facebook community, then please feel free also to come and hang out with us over on Facebook. Again, if you just follow the Money Panel, and at the top of the page, you'll find details about the group. So without further ado, I welcome to the podcast our guest today, Roxanne Bergman. So a massive welcome to the show, Roxanne. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
We've just been having a few giggles offline, haven't we? About
very much so.
Lots of things. We're hoping this is going to be
serious now. It's very difficult.
We need to put our serious hats on. Come on. Right. This is a raw podcast. No editing required. But a massive welcome to the show. I'm so honoured to have you on the show today because we were talking about actually it was last year, wasn't it? We were talking in the Facebook group about different ways to manage money, and I put a question out there to the audience and to my members about does anybody use the envelope system? Kind of expecting that some people may know about it, some people may not have ever heard about it. And you were one of the first people that commented to say, absolutely, yes, I've
Yeah.
used it and it's completely transformed the way I deal with money. And because this podcast is very much about real life stories, this isn't just a podcast about interviewing experts. This is about interviewing, ordinary people like yourself, like
Yeah.
me, just an ordinary person, about their experiences with money. So I'm really grateful to have you on the show today. So for those of you who have never come across Roxanne, tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you do?
Yeah, I am a portrait and wedding photographer. I specialise in sort of natural outdoor portraits and relaxed wedding photography. And I also do what I call unique headshots. So headshots for people in business that aren't like corporate style. So not like on a backdrop where you don't actually work. So
Nice.
headshots within situ, really.
Nice. Yeah. You're going to do some photos for me
Yes.
in the next few weeks. So I'll be
I
able to
will not
share
be
those.
bringing any weird backdrops for you to stand in, like a strange desk for you to sit in front of.
Oh gosh, I think most of my photos I've had so far actually have been me surrounded by my Cath Kidston mugs, which for anyone who knows me, I love Cath Kidston.
Yeah, see, that's you, then that's how it works, isn't it? That's how
Yeah,
photographs are better.
absolutely.
Unless
So
it is just literally you with like 20 mugs all around you.
that would be a bit weird.
This is my mug collection.
That would be so weird. Anyways, people are going to think I'm some weird Cath Kidston freak now. No, I'm seriously not. I do have a lot of Cath Kidston mugs, but I don't have 20. I have probably
You don't worship at the
4.
altar of them or anything.
So how long have you been a photographer for?
So I went to university and then I started my business straight afterwards. So since I was 21, I'm 33 now. So however many years that is, 12, 13 is that?
Wow, that's fabulous. So did you go to university to study photography?
I did, yeah. It was not really worth it, to be really honest. Everything that I've learned from photography, I've definitely learned by actually doing photography and being a photographer. But I remember my dad saying, start your business as early as possible. By the time it's successful, you'll still be young enough to enjoy it. And he was right.
And was your dad an entrepreneur?
Yes, he's an occupational psychologist. So he started his business. Actually, he started his business when the recession happened back in the 90s. So yeah, he did really
what a
well
time. What a
to
time
be
to start a
successful
business.
at that time.
Wow, what a time to start a business. It
Yeah,
just shows you, doesn't it?
that's easy.
Yeah. Wow. So so obviously that had an impact on you starting your entrepreneurial
Yeah.
journey at a very young age. Has that enabled for you and your husband to have a good lifestyle in terms of starting that entrepreneurial journey earlier than perhaps some people may?
Um, we definitely have a fantastic lifestyle now. It took many, many years for me to actually build photography up. And I think, to be really honest, if I had just trusted my instincts and ignored everyone, I do think I think I would have reached where I am a little bit quicker. It's definitely all the more sweet now that I have got there. I think that, it's advice I always give people. If people sort of say, oh, I'm thinking of starting a business, or my son or daughter's thinking of starting a business, I'm like, you might not want to hear this, but tell them just to ignore everyone. Because I think when it comes down to whatever it is that you do, whether it's photography or whatever it is, you're going to figure that out as you go. It's just being able to kind of block out everyone else's noise and worries about risk, I think, along the way. Because otherwise, if you don't, you're never, ever going to get to the destination that you want to be at.
Yeah, how interesting. That's really interesting. What kind of things did people say to you then in those early days?
I think that, like, a lot of people, like my mum, for example, was obviously concerned about me being quote unquote settled and obviously having security. And I think that, it was difficult for her to see at first. Like, I think she was just worried, she was worried about me having success. Now she's like, so happy that I stuck with it and incredibly supportive. My dad's always been very much like, you can do and be whatever you want. And I think he always kind of knew that it would work out. But I think a lot of the time you do get friends who are a little bit, I think that maybe they think that they're being supportive and that they're just kind of being worried. But I think sometimes it's a little bit passive aggressive.
Yeah, not always helpful
No.
advice. Yeah, I think as well, one of the things that I've learned from building my businesses over the years is that because my dad's an entrepreneur, so I've
Oh,
had that
really?
experience at a young age as well. And whilst it took me until I got into my 30s to launch my first business, he had a massive influence on that part of my life. But I think what I found is that a lot of my friends aren't entrepreneurs. And no
Yes, me too.
disrespect to them at all. Like I love them to pieces, but they're not in business. So
No.
I often find that sometimes if I want to talk about my business, I will talk about it to my female entrepreneur friends rather
Yes.
than my kind of
100%.
my personal friends, because whilst they'll listen to me kind of drone on about this, that, and the other, they just don't really understand
Yeah, I
what
think
it's
it's
like to
difficult
be.
for people to relate, definitely, because it's kind of really
Mm.
abstract for them. Because if they simply do not do that, then it's really difficult for them to know, like, what the hell are you going on
To
about?
say, yeah, what can I say at this point? I don't know how to support you. But I think you're right. It's, people will always give you advice, and it's about, as you say, listening to your gut and going with what you
Yeah,
feel is right. And I mean, certainly in the career that I've built over the last 12 months as a financial coach, then, I'm kind of doing things that some people don't do. And you kind of feel like, oh,
yeah,
is this wrong because no one else is doing this, or not many people are doing this?
yeah. Or is it
Um,
really right because no one else is doing it?
Absolutely, 100%. So, with your dad's influence, then, what kind of relationship did you have with money growing up?
I had really good, I suppose. I mean, we were very comfortable when I was a child, so I didn't ever have to worry about money, and I didn't really have a concept of money. I think I was probably one of those children because we were comfortable. I wasn't really aware of it. I think my first memory of money, like on a personal level, was that my dad would save up change for me, and I would count it. And then he
Mm.
would just give it to me after I'd counted it. I thought that was a good deal, really. Count this change, then you get it. So I did get used to dealing with money, if that makes sense. Like
Mm.
I got used to kind of handling money,
Mhm.
and my parents were both very much encouraged me to talk to people and to do things, little things like ordering my own meals in restaurants, that kind of thing, that you get used to having like adult conversations with people and interactions that do have a link to money. So I guess I
Money,
was
yeah.
used to that. Um, but I didn't have to worry about money.
That's really interesting.
And I think it wasn't until I was into my sort of early to mid 20s, when I obviously started my business in my early 20s. I knew that it was going to take a long time to build it up. So I worked in schools whilst I was building up my business. And that was quite challenging in that I think that, like, just because you're good at something doesn't necessarily mean it's what you're meant to do. So I was quite good at working in schools. Like, I like being around kids and stuff. And loads of people were like, maybe you should be a teacher, or maybe you should go into the pastoral side. And I was like, I could definitely do that, but I don't
Mm.
actually want to. And it's really difficult to just ignore like a whole bunch of people when they're like, you should, this is something you're good at. Maybe this is what you should be doing, when you're like, no, there's something else that I want to do, but there's basically no security in it yet. And I think it can be so difficult when you're watching all of your friends, because all of my friends, almost all of them, are friends that I've had since I was a kid. We've all stayed very close, and it can be very difficult to watch your friends make really, really good money when you're still counting your pennies, and to have that resolve to be like, no, 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 everything will be fine, ignore that.
Mm.
Eventually you'll have money. But it did all come right. I think you just have to be stubborn and stick your heels in and be like, this is going to work.
So, how did you deal with some of those challenges? So, seeing your friends, perhaps, climbing up the career ladder, earning more money, how did you deal with that?
I mean, me and my friends are all, like, my close friends, and we really are close, and we really are supportive of each other. So I never felt like, oh, I'm so annoyed that they're having success. And I think deep down, I just knew that what they were doing it just wasn't what I was going to be doing, and it wasn't actually what I wanted for myself. Obviously, again, absolutely nothing wrong with what they're doing. I just knew very specifically that I wanted to be a photographer. So I just knew that I had to keep going with that, and not get caught up in all like the things that you could do or the things that you could have. It's like, because at the end of the journey, when you get there, you're like, this isn't even what I wanted to do. Because that's going to be, because whatever you do will be a challenge. You know, it will be difficult to work yourself up to the top in any career. So, you know, you might as well do what you actually want to do. Put that energy somewhere where you actually want it to be.
So how did you know that is what you wanted to do?
I think like when I was a kid, my dad used to take a lot of photos of me. Like, he was really into photography. And we always used to have loads of family photos in the house. I used to sit and like go through them. That was one of my favorite things to do, was to look at photos. And then when I finished sixth form, and I was due to go to university to study, sociology and criminology. And then over that summer, me and my dad, we used to go out and take photos together and just spend time together. And I just realised that I wanted to be a photographer. And I'm so glad that I never went to university and wasted like all of the money and all of the time doing something.
But you could have had some fun as well, though.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely had the fun. I did the fun anyway. The fun happened. But I'm just glad that I didn't actually go off and, you know, do that 3-year course in something that I would never have actually wanted to do.
It's really, I mean, I never went to university. I had a place at a uni to do law. And then I was kind of toying between whether to do law or psychology.
Yeah.
And I decided to take a year out. I was with a boyfriend at the time. You know, I was 16, got engaged at 16. How bad is that?
Oh, my goodness.
And he was like, I don't go to uni. You know, I'll miss you too much, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah,
so I never
did a year
went.
out as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and I started working at the bank, and then that's where I stayed. But looking back on it, I think had I done law, it probably wouldn't have been my chosen career path.
No.
But I do wish I'd done psychology, because it is the psychology, you know, why humans react, why do we react, how we do, you know, some of the reasons.
I think it's all inextricably linked, isn't it? Like, different experiences with money will always be as a result of something in their past. Everything leads you to the point that you're at now, doesn't it? And I think psychology has like a huge role to play in that. Maybe that's something you should do.
Well, I mean, I do a lot of work coaching clients on a one-to-one basis around their relationship with money, and I mean, it's absolutely mind-blowingly powerful, because I think just having an idea of, you know, what your relationship is with money, and thinking about what kind of things does that you know, what kind of challenges does that bring for you, having that kind of relationship, and then also how you can harness the benefits of having that kind of relationship with money. And I guess that from your experience growing up with money, you've had a very good, you know, good disciplines, good conversations about money. You've given some examples there of how your parents actually encouraged you to, you know, order your own food at restaurants, for example, because often for children at that age as well, it's not just about what they're seeing and hearing, it's what they're doing.
Definitely.
And I remember, I think that's a great takeaway for any parent listening to this. I remember as a kid actually going to a holiday park in France one year, and I think I've talked about this on the podcast before. And I remember my stepdad gave me a £5. Well, he gave all of us a £5 to go to the shop and buy our own dinner that night. Yeah, and it was like, wow, I've got £5 what I can buy. And I remember buying.
Day of my life.
It seriously was. I had my bright yellow shorts on. I felt like I was the bee's knees, and I went to the shop with this £5. And I remember buying a pot noodle, because we were never allowed to buy pot noodles.
Yep, that is the classy thing to buy when you've got a £5.
In the 90s, it was. In the 90s, it was the thing, the pot noodle. But I also remember a couple of us clubbing some money together as well, kind of pulling our money resources together and buying more than what we could have bought on our own. But I still remember buying that pot noodle.
Gotta have a pot noodle, obviously.
Isn't that? It's just absolutely. But I still remember today that one thing, and it's just such an odd thing to remember. I don't remember much about my childhood at all, actually, but that one particular memory seems to stick in my mind. Oh, as well as that was the same summer, actually, that my stepdad put jam on my hand, and he thought it was a really good idea because I was scared of bees to put jam on my hand so that the wasps would fly to my hand and then I wouldn't be scared of them anymore.
That seems a little bit counterproductive.
I'm glad you think
That's
so.
like that thing
It
that
didn't
some
work.
parents do where they're like, we're going to teach you to not be scared of water by throwing you in so you nearly drown. It's like still like a really negative way of teaching children to swim.
Yeah, so parents, don't do that. If your kids are frightened of bees, don't put jam on their hands.
I mean,
It really
I
doesn't
may not
work.
have kids, I may not be a parent, but I just feel like that's a really bad way to get people over fears. Do not smear them with jam and throw them
Do
out
not
into the
smear them with
world.
jam. Oh, bless him. I'm sure he had all good intentions, but
Definitely.
yeah, definitely didn't
The
work for me.
execution, better in theory, not in execution. I think though, it wasn't really until I got into my 20s and then not really having money that I sort of struggled more with money. And it's only been in the last, I'd say it was the end of 2015 that I made the decision to go completely full time with photography and stop working in schools, because I was just like, if I don't do this thing, I'm never going to do this thing. Like if I don't stop working full time, then I'm never going to be able to then like parlay it over to photography.
Yeah.
But in that time, I just didn't have a lot of money and did sort of accrue like not crazy debts, but what I call normal debts.
Sure.
And then it wasn't until really last year where I was looking at my bank statements, and I was sat with my husband. I was just going through my bank statements, doing some of like my admin for my tax return. So I was just going through everything, and I was like, I am now not in that place where I'm struggling for money. I am now making good money. For why am I giving it all to Tesco? Like,
Was that your
it was
advice?
sickening. It was sickening looking at these bank statements, and I just knew then and there that I was like, I have got to do something about this.
That's interesting. So so you felt quite guilty, did you, of spending?
I felt disgusted with myself. That sounds really dramatic, doesn't it? But seriously, I think because I had not had money for so long, and I'd learned to kind of deal with that. But it was really, really difficult, like, because it wasn't so difficult seeing other people have money, because I don't obviously mind if other people have money, but it was just difficult not having it myself. So obviously it limited my options to be able to do things that I wanted to do. So then when I did, go full time with photography and just put all of my energy into that and all my focus and got really intentional, the success with it, and then obviously the money came after that. And then I sort of thought to myself, this is ridiculous. You spent so many, years not having the money that you wanted to have and not making the money that you wanted to have and not having those resources, and now you're giving them all to Tesco. Like, just because of a lack of organization. And I do think that really, like, whether you make good money or whether you're just scraping by, like, a lack of organization will be the tipping point for like everything coming crashing down.
Yeah, it's a really interesting. In fact, you've said two things there, which has really struck a chord for me. One is the lack of organisation, and the second one is being intentional with money.
Yes.
And I would say, out of all the females that I coach from a money management perspective, that being intentional and what I would call being proactive rather than reactive with money can make such a big difference, because but often often the reason that we're not intentional with money is because we are fearful of what are we going to uncover by looking at our bank statements.
100%. I also think that women on the whole are not groomed for success. They're not groomed to make money. I think that, like, women aren't necessarily groomed to be business owners, or they're not groomed to be entrepreneurs. They're not groomed to be able to make money and then understand money. Often when women then do have success and they make money, they're still even scared of money. They're scared of, like, having to get an accountant on board, and oh my god, my tax return, and what happens if I have to pay all this tax? Oh god, like, it's so funny how I don't see a lot of that happening with men. Like, men are groomed for success, and they're also kind of encouraged to not question themselves and to know that they're doing enough and they're doing the right thing. Whereas women constantly seem to feel like they're not doing enough, and that they're kind of apologetic for their own existence. And they're scared to make money, which is just so weird when you think about it. because like having enough and having enough resources and living like an intentional life, like the life that you actually want to live, is the thing that's going to actually make you happy. The other stuff, like the little fiddly things like getting an accountant, that's really not that difficult. But I think when you start and like when you're doing all of that sort of stuff yourself, everything just seems so scary, and you just like, oh my god, what if HMRC come and then they put me in prison?
Yeah.
You're like, yeah, that's probably not going to happen.
Yeah,
Don't think they really deal with that.
yeah, 100. It's that fear can actually, in this kind of imposter syndrome, that fear takes over,
Yes, it's
and it's
really
about,
crippling, I think.
yeah. I mean, we talked about this actually. I think it was 2 or 3 odd podcast episodes ago with the lady called Anna Parker Naples, who you may know
Yep,
actually.
yep, I
Um,
photographed her.
yes, you did. You did. In fact, I connected you with her, didn't
Yeah,
I? But she, we were talking about this whole concept of imposter syndrome and those feelings of fear, and sometimes the fear isn't the reality, and it's about challenging yourself to say,
yeah.
well, actually, is this fear that HMRC are going to knock on my door and throw me in prison reality, or is it just that I need to find myself a decent accountant and actually let them deal with that side of things that I don't need to deal with in my business. But I
Yeah, I
think,
think it's so funny the way you go to like such a crazy dark place and you're like, and then this can happen, and then this. It's like, yeah, none of those things are going to happen. Like
it's
literally,
completely
full
natural,
on
isn't
none
it?
of them.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, it's
Really
like,
unrealistic.
I mean, it's like, my brother, for example, is very fearful of flying.
Yeah,
And, for anybody who has a really big fear, like flying, for example, I can imagine him sitting on the plane and thinking, oh my God, the windows are going to implode. The air
I
hostesses
really
are
hope
going
he's
to,
not listening to this podcast.
yeah. He doesn't. I'm safe. He's like, your podcast is for women. I'm a man. I can't listen to it. I'm like, no, it's
I'm
fine. You
just
can
going
still
to go on
listen
the
to it.
podcast and list all the terrible things that could happen in the event of an air crash.
In fact, I'll be really surprised actually if he does listen to this. But no, I know he won't. But no, it is this whole concept of we just over exaggerate that fear and that feeling. And often, I was working with a lady last week actually who has a lot of fear associated with opening bank statements. And
Yeah,
one of the challenges that I set her for that week with my support, so we had like a WhatsApp group we opened up for her, and I set her a challenge to start opening her post, and we did it together. We talked through how she was feeling about it, and
right.
actually, when she'd done it, she was like, "What was I scared about?"
I
Like,
guess if you've had really negative experiences with money where maybe you've overspent and then you can't pay things back, perhaps that would then like create this like terror around
yeah,
getting
100%.
mail.
Yeah, and I think it was just kind of talking through that first and understanding where is that fear coming from, and challenging that emotion. Often it is the work that we do around the emotions of money and being intentional. Combine those two things together, and wow, everything starts to become intentional. We have organization in our life.
And then you're amazed
Um,
by what you can actually do in such a
mm,
short space of time. And just the idea that like it's okay for you to make money, like that's actually the point.
Yeah, 100%, especially in business. You're
Yeah.
in business to make money. And yes, you have a message to tell and, all of those things. But at the end of the day, a business needs to be profitable.
Yes.
And otherwise, there would be no point in running that business. So, yeah, absolutely being intentional and having some organization. So when you were during that transition, Roxanne, from working with the school to then deciding that you wanted to go full time into becoming an amazing photographer, what kind of challenges then did you have with money around that time, and how did you start to implement or even know anything about the budgeting envelope system?
I came across the budgeting emphasis. So I'd struggled with not having enough money for quite a few years. And then once I went full time with photography at the end of 2015, by not even that far into 2016, I was already making enough money that I wasn't struggling anymore. I obviously went like for quite a long time before I then was like, I am wasting a lot of money. This is ridiculous. And it wasn't until last year in August that I came across a woman on YouTube called Jordan Page. I'm like Wayne's World, like all hail Jordan Page, like literally worship at the altar of Jordan Page. She's absolutely amazing. And I just bizarrely, I think I was searching on YouTube for something like I don't know, how to save money, something like that. And quite a few videos came up about investing like huge sums of money in things, and I was like, if I had huge sums of money then I wouldn't be
Yeah, that's
searching
interesting.
this, would I? So
Mm.
I happened to come across her, and she is like one of these people who kind of deals with lifestyle spending, you know, one of those kind of like experts in lifestyle spending, and she has a budgeting like an envelope budgeting technique, and I'd already heard of it. Like I'd already seen like other bits and pieces, and I know that like a lot of grandparents and great grandparents always used to do the envelope system, so where you would get all your money for the week. And I think some people would have multiple envelopes, so they'd have like a mortgage envelope, and then like a utilities envelope, and then a grocery envelope, and all these different envelopes. But the video I watched was saying about just having the one envelope, and it worked really, really well. I thought, you know what, I'm just going to give this a go. Kind of have refined it over the months that I've been using it, but it completely transformed the way that I saw money. So you just get an envelope, shockingly enough, and just write the month at the top of the envelope, and then just divide it in, sort of put a line down the middle. One side is for food, and the other side is for like miscellaneous. So
Hmm.
if you want to go for a coffee with a friend, or you want to buy a top, that kind of thing, that all goes into miscellaneous. And then the food, you then draw lines across and then break it up for the amount of weeks that you've got in a month. So it would be like 4 blocks or 5 blocks.
Yeah.
And then you can set an amount of money, you know, that you want to stick to. I just kind of followed what it said in the video, and I try to spend either on a 5 week month, I stick to £60. On a 4 week month, I stick to 75. But I always try my hardest to come in, especially on 75 week months, if that makes sense, to come in less than that, because it is just the two of us. And I don't like, for anyone who knows me, they've seen my pictures online of how much my husband eats. Like he could eat at a competitive level. Like this is a man who would eat like a whole chicken as a snack. That's not a joke. He's
Oh, so
done
man
that on
versus
multiple
food challenge.
occasions. So he is, you know, we're both very much foodies, and like
Enjoy your
food,
foods.
yeah,
Yeah.
is like a real big part of our relationship. I love
Mm.
cooking. It's like a big passion of mine. Yeah, so I decided I would do that. The very first week, I decided I would try to keep it to £50 just as a challenge, and I managed to
Mm.
do it. And it wasn't even that difficult, but it just meant that I had to get organised. I tend to only do food shopping once a week, and I shop around and go to various different places. I go to the market to get fruit and veg. I There's a specific meat guy, that sounds funny, meat man, that
Man.
we use. You know, probably would call himself a butcher. That would be a bit more accurate than meat man. In Wolverton, where I live, there's a little market, and I get my meat from what I call Meat Man, and the eggs from the Egg Lady. I'm sure they have names, like real world names, but you know, they're
That's
Man
your
and Egg
challenge
Lady at
next
the
week.
moment.
Next time you go and see them, go and find out their first
I think that
names.
the meat guy's called Lee. His first name is Lee. I do not know Egg Lady's
Ah.
name, unfortunately. But yeah, I do all of that sort of stuff on one day. So you take out the money that you want to use. At the beginning, I would definitely recommend like taking out the cash and putting it in the envelope. So I keep a little paper envelope, and then I have a plastic envelope that all goes into. And then when you spend a bit of money, so for example, you spend £20 of your budget, you write on the envelope £20, and then you put the receipt into the envelope, just so if you need to return something, or you want to look through and make sure that everything's accurate, you've got all the records there. um, and yeah, in the beginning, I would recommend taking the cash out. So when it's gone, it's gone. Now I'm a little bit more responsible. I allow myself to use my card, but I
Good.
obviously still write everything onto the envelope. But definitely in the beginning, I think if I hadn't used cash, I don't reckon I would have seen how effective the system was
Mm.
so quickly, because I definitely think that seeing is believing. And I think when you've got cash and you can see it going down, it's just somehow more powerful. And then once you get to grips with that system, then you can kind of switch to, using your debit card or whatever it is that you want to do. And yeah, it's just allowed me to save so much money. I never would have imagined that it could have transformed things so much. And then with the miscellaneous budget or other budget, whatever you want to call it, you just set yourself like an amount that you can afford. And I think you just have to get honest with yourself about what you can really justify, because it's all about self-justification, isn't it? Like if you can
Yeah.
justify genuinely justify whatever, certain amount a week, then brilliant. But I think really deep down everyone knows what they can and can't afford, but they just would rather stay blind to it. I
Yeah, I think as well in there, it's about. I mean, you're absolutely right. Like it's so intentional. I think for me, it's also understanding about what value does that hold to you.
Yes.
So if you're a foodie and you're spending on average more than your next door neighbor or your best friends, then that's fine. It's not about feeling
No.
guilty about spending more than somebody else, which is why I don't necessarily agree with where some money experts will say put 10% of your money in here and 20% of your money over here. I don't think there's a fixed rule as to how much people should be putting into different places. I think that when it comes to spending, it's about looking at the money that's coming in, where is it going, and then identifying, giving every pound a job. Really, it's this concept of
Yes,
giving every pound
definitely.
a job.
And like, are you happy with where the money is
Yeah.
going? Because for me, like exactly what you just said, I looked at my bank statements and I was like, I am very unhappy with
Mm.
where all this money is going. This is absolutely ridiculous. Whereas now, I would say I spend half or even less than
Wow.
half of the amount that I used to spend on food. And my fridge and my freezer and my cupboards are always jam packed full. Before, I was shopping in the most ridiculous way. I would have a whole load of food, but you didn't have like two things that match, if that makes sense. I didn't have, and I'd always have to run out and get something to complete a meal. And another thing that goes like really, really well with envelope budgeting is meal planning, because
Mm.
envelope budgeting is so linked to your food bill, and your food bill is where you go bankrupt. That's where like a lot of people spend a hell of a lot of money and overspend massively, because it's like a non-optional thing to spend money on. And it's one of those things I always say, like when you go to Tesco's, my phrase is you can't go in without doing what I call the £20 pop in.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
cannot spend less than £20 in Tesco's. It's impossible.
No, because
It's
they're
like
very
a basic
clever.
law of nature.
Yeah, retailers
And
are
you
very
just
clever, aren't they? They put things by the counter.
Yeah, and you
It's
think to yourself, oh, okay, well, I actually do genuinely need this, that, or the
yeah.
other. And it's those things, those like £20 pop-ins, if you're doing that 2, 3 times a week, which genuinely I think a lot of people are. It's not, it wasn't just me. I know tons of people who have done this. My friend, I was explaining to her about the envelope budgeting system. She now does it, and she saved absolutely loads of money. And she was like, I was just spending crazy amounts of money. So I was very resistant in the beginning to doing food, like meal planning, because I was like, oh, I don't know what I'm going to want to eat, on Thursday. But realistically, how many meals do you like? People probably only have like a repertoire of like 20 meals. As long as you've got enough to make 7 of them in your
Yeah.
house, you
It's
don't have to leave the house again to then go and do the £20 pop in.
Yeah, we talked actually the podcast episode that went out this week was with a lady called Faith Archer, and she is a financial journalist and money blogger. And we spent the whole episode talking about food planning. So I'm really
Yeah,
glad that you've brought that up, because I think for anybody, it is one of those areas that we tend to overspend on. It's the biggest expense normally, after our mortgages or
yeah,
our
like
rent
outside of your
payments,
mortgage.
isn't
Yeah,
it? Yeah, and because it's a variable, isn't it? It's not a fixed cost that
yes.
just goes out of your account every month that you can budget for. This is, it's a variable amount. If you're going out and treating the family over the weekend to a takeaway or a meal out, then that can add to the expense. And it's just being intentional and identifying where you're spending that money to then.
Definitely. For me, like if I go out for a meal or if I have a takeaway, I add that to my other budget, like my miscellaneous budget, because that's for fun. Like,
It's a
even
treat.
though I'm technically eating, I enjoy eating and it is fun. So, yeah, it's like you say, it's a treat thing. So therefore that would go in my other budget. My food budget is literally for like what me and my husband consume, like breakfast, lunch and dinner and snacks and the stuff that is actually in the kitchen for cooking.
Yeah.
And it also includes, what you'd call consumable things like toilet rolls and kitchen rolls and shampoo and cleaning products. It includes all of that as well, which might be, I think that a lot of people will be like, this is all very well and good if you don't have children. But obviously, you just add money for each person that's in your house.
Yeah.
And you are not going to be buying all of those things every week. Like, people aren't necessarily going to be buying cleaning products every single week. You're probably going to be buying those things once a month, maybe even less time than that. So it's not something to freak out about. It's totally like 100% doable. And this is coming from a woman who was basically emptying her bank account into Tesco's. And now I just don't do that. I was amazed by how quickly I was able to like just make the shift. It took like a couple of weeks, and then that was that.
And did you make any other changes? Or was it just implementing that alone that helped you?
That was the first thing. So I did that to start with, and then realized that meal planning was going to be a huge part of that, and that they really fed each other. And when I say meal planning, I just mean like I just have a little note on my phone, like Monday through Sunday, and write down, what we're going to have, and then I know what I need to get. Then I know, like, I think most people probably, if you're the person who's doing the shopping, you kind of know just in your mind what
You
you're
can
going
plan
to need
it.
to get. But those two things together are really, really key. And also, like I say, trying to keep the other budget like realistic. And obviously every week will be a bit different. Like, sometimes if you have a friend's birthday, then obviously you'll spend a bit more than you did, say, a week before when you weren't really doing anything. But I try to keep it between 50 and £100, because I just think that that's a manageable amount that still allows me to be able to save money. And then I suppose the third thing that I did was, and this is another thing that the lady that I came across on YouTube recommends. I think a lot of financial planners recommend this as well. I know that you've been a proponent of this, is having multiple bank accounts. I have like a whole bunch of bank accounts, and I think initially people think of that as really confusing and really scary. But I, honest to God, do not know how I ever managed without multiple bank accounts now. Because
How many accounts do you have?
let me just count. One, two. I have like six bank accounts. I would be looking to open more as well. I actually opened a Starling bank account because you recommended it, which was so easy to set up, like so easy
They're
to set up.
fabulous.
That bank account is the one that I use for like birthdays and Christmases. I actually remember you saying that you were like, birthdays and Christmases are one of the very few things that they're going to happen every year, so maybe save for them. And I was like, you know what, she's very right about that. Maybe I will. Maybe I should be saving for them. So I use that bank account, and then literally just, I do think, like, just put like a fiver in it every now and again, and then by the end of the year you've got all the money that you need for Christmas. But by splitting up where my money goes, I don't know how I ever managed not doing that, because now I can literally log into my online banking and see at a glance what is in every single account, what I need to take out of one account and add to another to make sure that, bills are going to be covered, that kind of thing. And then what's left over, what can then go into savings and saving in different areas, because otherwise, it's going to be really, really difficult to ever have what you want and have the life that you want. If, again, like, I think the word of this podcast is intentional. If you don't get intentional about where you're saving.
Yeah, absolutely right. Intentional. I love the concept of having multiple accounts. And actually, the beauty of something like Starling Bank or Monzo is that you don't have to have multiple bank accounts. You can just have multiple pots.
Yes.
So Starling Bank has the something built into their app where you can actually create little goal pots, and you can label them up. You can put pictures behind them. You can set a regular amount to go into those pots every month and automate that, or you can do it manually yourself. And I love that concept, because it means you don't have to necessarily have lots of different accounts in different organizations, but you can just have separate pots.
Yeah, definitely. However, it's easiest, I think, to be able to just see what you've
Yeah.
got, because before, I
Yeah.
was just seeing everything within one bank account as just like a lump. But then that you've got different direct debits that are going to come out at different times. That's another thing, I think, is knowing. I know obviously it'll be kind of different every month in terms of like weekends and that kind of thing, but knowing approximately when all of your bills come out within the month, to know that there's enough money in there, if you're living very tight initially. I think that is really, really important, just getting clear about what comes out and when it comes out.
Yeah, absolutely. And are there any other key tips or anything that you wanted to leave the listeners with today, Roxanne, from your own personal experience?
I think with just tips with envelope budgeting is honestly just get started and just give it a try. I think that you do have to try it for a few weeks just to be able to see the benefit of it. But also, if you sort of have a look at your bank statements, add everything up as a whole, what you've spent in a month at like Tesco's and Asda and all those sort of places, and it will be like scary amount of money. And then do the envelope budget, and then if you'll be able to see like such massive difference, and then you'll be able to take that money, because if you could already afford to be overspending and you weren't like really, really struggling, but you obviously knew that you were spending too much, and then you do an envelope budgeting system and you see how much it saves you, just save the difference, because you were already living to that level anyway. So if you can put that aside, or even half of it, if you can even just put half of that difference aside, then that can honestly be transformative. At the end of last year, I think I mentioned to you, and is a lady called Laura, who's the online tax accountant.
Yes, Laura Moss.
Yeah. I think because I watched the video that you guys did together last year, and I mentioned how having I think she was talking about having a buffer when she was talking about saving for tax and things like that. And I'd had like a little bit of a mess up last year where I thought I was going to be paying a certain amount of tax, but actually ended up having to pay a lot more. And using this envelope budgeting system, I had to come up with, I think it was like about £1,500 within the 3 months, which to, self-employed photographer who it's just me working is quite a lot of money. And I was able to do that in a month and a half.
Wow, that's amazing.
By just using this envelope budgeting system. So
yeah, one of the I remember that was a Facebook Live that we did last year, and we had a few technical difficulties. We ended up doing it over two separate videos. But that video is available on the Money Panel Facebook page for those of you who haven't seen it. But yeah, one of the things, particularly for business owners, particularly actually as a sole trader, in your first year or so of business, is getting to that habit of shimmying aside 20 to 30% of your income into a separate account, so that when your tax bill is due, you've already got that money allocated.
And that's another thing that I've done. It is so funny, and I remember my husband saying this. He was like, once you get organized in terms of like the envelope budgeting, he was like, once you organize one part of your finances, he was like, you'll be amazed how everything else just starts to kind of follow. So my husband's always been fantastic with money, and he was right. He was completely right. Once I started doing this and I was seeing how much I was able to save, I was like, okay, so now I need to get clear about where I'm going to put it. And I have a completely separate account that I use for tax and national insurance contributions. And when money comes into my account from like a wedding or a portrait, whatever it is, I just take 30% and just immediately put it in there. And then if at the end of the year you've got more money than you owe, then, living it up time.
And HMRC will definitely not come knocking on your door.
No, to put you in prison. Because they do that so often.
What I was going to say actually is that the next season on the podcast is going to be about women and investing. It's an area that's particularly close to my heart, and I did a live recorded workshop last night actually for 90 minutes about what is the stock market, how can we improve women's confidence and get more women investing.
That's amazing.
And you just mentioned in there actually about this can organize other areas of your finance once you start, it can actually identify other things that you can be doing with your money. So interestingly for you, Roxanne, are you investing in the stock market at the moment?
No, and I would actually like to, funnily enough. I think I might have mentioned to you, like maybe on your group, that I'd be really, really interested in that. Because it's also like fuzzy and confusing and unclear, isn't it? And you're like, how do I
Mm,
make it so that I don't give my money to a fraudster? And how do I
yeah.
identify fraudsters?
Yeah, it's a
And
really good
that's
point.
so hard. Like that's the hard part of it. And I think that's what's brilliant about what you're doing, because you're just like, this is how you do it without going bankrupt. Happy birthday.
So is that what would you say is preventing you from using some of that money that you're now saving, and perhaps rather than saving it, investing it? What do you think is stopping you from doing that?
Really, the only thing that was stopping me from doing that was a complete lack of knowledge.
Mm. That's interesting. Yeah, it came out that the two top reasons on the webinar last night was confidence and knowledge.
Yeah.
A
I think, to
combination
be
of those
honest,
two
if I
things.
had like someone like yourself guiding me through the process, I wouldn't be unconfident about it, because I would be like, okay, so I know I'm in safe hands. I know this person understands what this is and how to do it. So for me, the confidence wouldn't be an issue at that point. I think it's having someone to go guide you through the process, isn't it? Because it can be like, I just think how unbelievably terrifying, and potentially I'm not a risk averse person at all. I think most people who own businesses do take risks a lot of the time, even if they realize it or not. But
Mm.
you want to take a good, like, positive calculated risk,
Controlled risk.
not a risk
Yeah.
that makes you bankrupt.
Yeah, well, I do hope that you'll get some value from listening to the next series of the podcast, because we will be tackling just conversations like risk. What is risk? And actually
Yes.
reframing and thinking about exactly what risk means.
I think because people have such a negative attack, like there's such negative connotations and negative stigma just with the word risk.
Yeah,
It's
100%.
like
I mean,
risk is not necessarily a bad thing.
yeah, most women associate investing risk with gambling. And they'll associate it with, going down to the bookies and
Right.
sticking a tenner on a horse. And in reality, with, as beautifully put, with calculated risk, it isn't about, throwing your money into
So just
Bitcoin
throwing your
or
money.
no, it's but again, it comes down to that lack of knowledge, and that's what I really want to champion in the next series, is actually giving for you
Yeah,
listeners
that's
out
really
there some
cool.
understanding about investing. But no, just interested to see what your experience has been of, now that you're starting to free up some money. Actually, are you saving it or are you investing it? So it still shows to me that there's a big gap of knowledge and confidence for women about
Yeah,
this topic of investing.
definitely. And I think the more you
Yeah.
can make it, like, the more you can normalize it, the more that then the future generation of women will not be so weirded out. And because I think
Mm.
most people wouldn't even consider investing, whereas I think a lot of people, like, I know that my husband's granddad, for example, he invested a lot. He did it really, really frequently, and he had like good returns on it, but it was really normal for him. He just thought that was the most normal thing in the world. He just trusted what he was doing and trusted the advice of the people that helped him invest. Nothing went wrong, everything was fine. So
I
I
think it goes
think,
back to
yeah.
what you were saying earlier as well, about men are groomed
Yes,
to
they're
be
groomed for
seen as,
success and to
yeah,
make
a groomed for
money.
success, and that it's okay for men to be investing. And actually, the language in the industry is very masculine. It's
Yeah.
very geared towards men being very successful with money, and women not. Women being, overspenders, sticking money on, shopping excessively, and all of these things. And actually, Starling Bank did some research around this in their Make Money Equal campaign, and some of the research they did around the percentage of articles written in magazines and newspapers that talk about how women are bad with money in comparison to how men are good with money was really interesting.
Yeah,
And
it's
we
it's
talked about that on
staggering,
the.
isn't it, when you see the absolute massive difference. But it's exactly the same as in terms of, like, anything really, like the beauty industry and how that was essentially created to keep really to keep women in a certain place, to
Mm,
make, like, because women had money, and it was like, okay, so what are we going to do with women and their money? Okay, so we need to keep them in this kind of holding pattern of being terrified about money and knowing that they needed to stay kind of quote unquote in their place. It's really difficult to get women to just, I think, again, I was saying to you about like the advice about for business owners to just ignore everyone and just focus on what it is that you want to do. I think that that's the case a lot of the time with money. You know, as long as you're not being really irresponsible, and you know, most people aren't. Most people are not complete morons. You know, they just have like day-to-day spending. Just ignore that negativity and just think to yourself, because I think people think, well, what if this happens? It's like, yeah, but what if it doesn't? What if something really brilliant happens instead? And there's every chance that that will happen over something terrible happening, as long as you've got the right information and someone to guide you who
100%. It's
knows.
all education, you know, because we're not stupid,
No.
you know, as we are clever, responsible grown-ups,
Like if
most
you
of
can
us.
manage to get to that point, yeah, where you own a business, or in some case multiple businesses for a lot of the people who are listening, and a lot of these people are also parents, and it's like you've managed to keep humans alive and grow businesses. You're not an idiot. Like you can totally do this.
I love that. I love that. Keeping grown-ups alive, or
Yeah,
keeping humans
humans
alive. Yeah,
alive.
no one gives you a handbook, do they, on how to bring up kids,
And
and no one gives you a
I don't
handbook
even
on how
do
to
that.
deal with
All I'm
money.
doing is attempting to run one business.
Well, you're doing very, very well.
Oh,
And for those of you listening that want to find out a bit more about Roxanne's photography business, do you work just locally within Buckinghamshire, Roxanne, or do you
no,
travel out
I go
to other
all
parts?
over, literally all over the country. I would happily leave the country as well,
Amazing.
for the
Ooh.
right offer. But yeah, I go all over the country with my photography, for portraits and weddings.
And where can somebody find out more about your business?
My website is roxpixphotography.com, and Facebook is Roxpix Photography, and Instagram is, what a shock, Roxpix Photography. So that's spelled ROXPIX photography.
Fabulous. I'll pop some links in the show notes for anybody listening.
Brilliant.
And just finally, are there any other apps? We mentioned Starling Bank in the conversation, but are there any other apps that you could not live without in your life?
The other app that's my favorite that isn't actually a finance app is an app called Snapseed, and it's a photography app. So it's just like a photo editing app, but I absolutely love it. It's really easy to use, really, really user friendly, and it's helpful for things like cropping and lighting and that kind of thing for Instagram photos. So I use that a lot for my Instagram feed.
Oh, and filtering out dark circles under the eyes,
Yeah,
that kind of
they
stuff.
have a healing tool. It's literally called healing. I like the way it's not called
Ooh.
like get rid of your spots tool.
Oh, I'm definitely going to check that out. I'll tell you, after my workshop I ran last night, I think we finished at 9:30, and I was just buzzing so much afterwards. I didn't get to sleep till about 2 o'clock this
Oh, so
morning.
you
So
need the healing tool.
I need the healing. Definitely need that today. And favorite Netflix show? Are you a Netflix watcher?
Yes, I am. I suppose I don't have like I suppose one of my favorite programs on there would be Gilmore Girls, but that's not necessarily a Netflix program. I guess my favorite ones are what I refer to as murder documentaries, which makes me sound like a bit of
Ooh.
a psychopath as I'm saying it out loud. I'm now realizing that makes me sound very strange outside of the context of just saying that to my husband. But I really, really find those programs fascinating. And I'm also seeing all over Facebook that other people are the same as me. So maybe I'm not a complete weirdo. I find programs about how they solve crimes and stuff like that really, really fascinating.
Have you watched the Making of a Murderer?
I've watched everything, basically. I've watched that and the Ted Bundy program and the Dirty John program.
Oh,
I don't know
Dirty
if
John,
you've watched
yeah.
Abducted in Plain Sight, but if you
Oh no.
haven't, seriously prepare yourself for that program before you watch it.
You should go and be a photographer for like crime scenes or something.
I just imagine though that
No, I'm joking. I'm joking. Far nicer to do a nice celebration of a wedding or
yeah, I feel
a
like
business
that's just more uplifting somehow than
owner
all
somehow.
the dead bodies.
And what about a favorite book recommendation? So either personal or business related.
I'm reading at the moment a book called Profit First, and
Oh
that's
yeah.
yeah. Have you read that?
Yeah, it was recommended by one of my previous guests. A fantastic book.
Yeah, I think it's really good. I'm not finished yet. I think I'm about halfway through, I'd say. It's really difficult, I think, sometimes reading a book by an American writer, because don't they write so completely differently to the way that English people do? And
Yeah.
I find it a little bit difficult sometimes to follow his sentence structures, but the actual message I think is really good. So I'm learning a lot from that. And my personal favorite book, I'd say, is probably To Kill a Mockingbird. Really, really love that.
Oh, that's a classic. What a
Yeah.
classic. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time. I literally could just carry on talking to you for what would be forever. And I wish you all the very best in your business for the rest of this year. Thank you so, so much for your time. And we'll pop some links in the show notes to your business, how people can connect with you, and details of your recommended apps and books. So thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
And I look forward to engaging with you again back in the Facebook group.
You too.